The cold, sterile walls of the high-security holding facility were meant to break a man, to enforce absolute solitude and humiliation, but for Augustus Darren Finch, the isolation provided the ultimate, necessary crucible for his final transformation. He existed in the silence of his cell, awaiting the meticulously orchestrated trial that would result in a minimized, controlled sentence with the same cold resignation and focus he applied to auditing complex financial reports. His body was caged, but his mind, sharper and more ruthless than ever, was free to calculate the immense, non-monetary debt Victor Sterling now owed him. He viewed the jail time as a necessary operational cost, a temporary sacrifice made to secure the immense future power that Sterling's gratitude guaranteed. The entire episode, from the slap in the street to the violence in the gallery, had distilled his existence into a single, unshakable theorem. Power is the only true form of protection, and absolute loyalty to power is the most valuable commodity. He had paid the toll, and he was simply waiting for the gates to open to his reward. The reward, however, arrived in a form so utterly bizarre and fundamentally unexpected that it shattered the foundation of his entire cynical calculus and launched his life onto a completely new, terrifying trajectory. While in prison, he received the staggering news delivered by a pair of Victor Sterling's most senior, most solemn corporate lawyers who arrived unannounced, their expensive suits looking ludicrously out of place against the drab, institutional backdrop of the prison visitor room. The news was an utter impossibility, a grotesque joke played by fate. Victor Sterling, the chairman, had committed suicide. The billionaire, the architect of a global shadow empire and a man who commanded ultimate control over life and death, had been found dead in his private, secure residence, the cause confirmed as self-administered poisoning, a decisive, final act carried out with the same chilling precision he applied to his business decisions. The official story, which Darren pieced together from the lawyer's hushed, respectful tones and the subsequent media frenzy that momentarily eclipsed all other world news, was that Victor Sterling, unable to reconcile the vast, terrifying moral abyss he inhabited, the immense psychological strain of managing a criminal empire, and the crushing weight of his absolute solitude, had simply chosen to exit the game. For years, Sterling had managed the immense external pressure of rivals, governments, and enemies, but he could not manage the intense internal pressure of his own conscience, or perhaps, more accurately, the crippling isolation that absolute power had imposed upon him. This was the final, profound irony that Darren would now inherit. The strong man, the ultimate predator, was destroyed by an internal weakness that Darren himself had ruthlessly purged from his own soul. But the most inexplicable shock followed the revelation of the suicide. In a final, baffling, and utterly unpredictable act of existential confession, Victor Sterling left his entire, sprawling industrial and financial empire to Darren in his will. The Sterling Group, the legitimate FOD encompassing global shipping, resource extraction, high-frequency trading firms, and vast real estate holdings, was now Darren's. The shadow infrastructure of the chairman, the network of security contractors, intelligence assets, offshore banks, and the layers of criminal enterprise was also tacitly placed under his control. The staggering, sudden inheritance made Darren Finch, the man recently arrested for a violent incident, the sole inheritor of a fortune so vast it defied easy calculation, instantly making him one of the most powerful and wealthy men on the planet. The will itself was a strange, haunting document that only deepened the philosophical wound in Darren's soul. Sterling explicitly named Darren as his successor, deliberately bypassing his estranged wife, Eleanor, who received only a controlled, limited annuity, and all other potential corporate rivals. The key passage, which the lawyers read with bewildered solemnity, cited Darren's pure heart and unshakable loyalty as the foundational reasons for his appointment. Sterling wrote that Darren was the only man he had ever encountered who remained fundamentally honest, whose service was always based on a transaction of protection rather than simple greed, and whose intense, Self-sacrificing loyalty proven by taking the fall in the gallery demonstrated an integrity that Victor Sterling himself had murdered decades ago. The ultimate cynic, facing death, had found his successor in the only man who still possessed the core, inconvenient goodness he once had, a goodness that Darren had been desperately trying to bury. The legal system, which had been preparing to convict Darren, instantly shifted with the sickening sound of power recalculating its allegiance. The charges vanished overnight. The judge presiding over the case suddenly found the key witnesses unreliable, the evidence circumstantial, and the entire incident a tragic misunderstanding of self-defense involving a minor scuffle. Darren was immediately released from prison, not with a quiet walk out the back door, but with a full, overwhelming media spectacle outside the main gates. He emerged from the drab confines of the prison and stepped into a blinding, flashing world he now owned, instantly becoming the unexpected, unglamorous chairman of a global powerhouse, a man of staggering, incomprehensible wealth and immense, terrifying influence. The contrast between his past life and his present reality was so profound it bordered on the surreal. The man who was despised for his dark features and low-class origin was now, instantly and without question, revered. He was immediately treated with fawning respect by every person he encountered. The lawyers, the same ones who had nervously managed his arrest, now treated him with a bowing deference that bordered on reverence, hanging on his every quiet, precise word as if it were a divine pronouncement. The surviving, calculating members of the Sterling family, who had previously ignored his existence, emerged from the woodwork like vultures, offering effusive, fake condolences and treating him as the family's new rightful patriarch. Former rivals within the chairman's organization, who had plotted his downfall, now sent meticulously detailed reports pledging absolute, immediate loyalty. The media, always a mirror reflecting power, was the starkest measure of the change. The same newspapers that had subtly referenced his unruly appearance during the arrest and highlighted his lower-class background now wrote glowing, fawning pieces about the brilliant, private visionary who had earned the trust of the late Victor Sterling. They praised his quiet intensity, his deep focus, and his unassuming intellect, all the traits that had previously made him an outsider. His dark features were now called strikingly commanding, his quiet demeanor a sign of thoughtful control. It was a stark contrast to the casual disrespect and active prejudice he faced before. Darren, observing this universal, nauseating shift in attitude, felt nothing but a profound, cold disgust. He realized the world had not changed. Only his position had. The people who bowed to him were bowing to the sheer, crushing weight of the money he controlled, not to the man he was. The irony of his inherited title chairman, Master Augustus, was now fully manifest. He had fought the system by trying to beat it on its own terms: money, efficiency, and cynical loyalty. He had destroyed the vulnerable poet within to become the perfect corporate weapon. And now, he had inherited the entire toxic kingdom of the man who died of the very vulnerability Darren had sacrificed. He was now the king, but the crown was forged of the very irony that had plagued his life. He had everything he had ever cynically sought: absolute power, wealth beyond measure, and the guaranteed protection of Sarah. But he felt nothing but the vast, terrifying emptiness left by Victor Sterling's conscience, an emptiness he was now tasked with filling. His new empire was not a reward. It was a vast, poisoned inheritance, a final, monumental challenge to see if the machine he had become could rule the kingdom built on moral rot without succumbing to the same fate as its architect. The quiet man from the Rust Belt now stood on the summit of the world, utterly alone, gazing over the vast, cold landscape of his own making, ready to command the system that had once destroyed him.